Okay, so our three divisions, sympathetic and parasympathetic. The division is both anatomic and functional. Okay, the sympathetic division is in fact stimulatory. It's a fight or flight system, but it is also found in the thoracolumbar spine. It's found in the center of the spinal column. Okay, and so we call it, in addition to sympathetic, we call it the thoracolumbar division because of where it emerges from the central nervous system. The parasympathetic is rest and digest, right? So it's an inhibitory, calming, healing system. But it also has an anatomic orientation that is cranio and sacral. So we call it the craniosacral division. Okay, so from the cranial nerves and from the sacral nerves. So our two divisions. Then the enteric system is all of the sensory, motor, and interneurons that are involved in the digestive tract. So you can see by all these ganglia that are present here, now some of these are part of the sympathetic and parasympathetic, but the enteric system, the organs of the GI tract themselves have a bunch of ganglia built in and around them. So they sort of have their own control system. The enteric system controls the GI tract without the need for central nervous system input. You can be brain dead and still digest normally, believe it or not, right? So what does that tell you? It means that the gut is independent of the brain. Now, the brain can influence the gut's activity, like when we are scared or stressed, our digestive tract changes its activity, right? So that's an influence, but we don't need the brain to control the central or to control the GI tract. All right, so if we look at the sympathetic division, we're going to see some characteristics here, right? So thoracolumbar immersion, that's where they come out of the spinal column. What comes out are the ganglionic neurons, right? The ganglionic neurons, preganglionic neurons come out of the spinal cord, synapse with their ganglia, either the sympathetic chain, which sits right next to the spinal cord, or the collateral ganglia, which are found in the pelvic or the abdominal pelvic cavity. And then from those ganglia, we'll go out to the target organs. Now, down here is something unique to the sympathetic. There's not something similar in the parasympathetic. This is the adrenal medulla. Okay, so the adrenal medulla acts like a modified ganglia. A ganglia, remember, sends nerve axons to distant sites to make things happen, right? Well, the adrenal medulla is stimulated by the preganglionic neuron to release epinephrine and norepinephrine into the circulation. Now, you're going to see that epinephrine and norepinephrine are also the neurotransmitters of the rest of the sympathetic system. So what I'm trying to point out here is the adrenal medulla acts like acts like a sympathetic ganglia for the whole body. Because instead of releasing neurotransmitter across a synapse, like these do, here the neurotransmitter is dumped into the blood in large amounts. The blood goes everywhere and distributes that neurotransmitter to a whole bunch of different target organs at once, right? So essentially, the adrenal medulla is like a sympathetic ganglia, but instead of neurons, it releases hormones instead into the general circulation. So we have our preganglionic fibers, postganglionic fibers, and then in the case of the adrenal medulla, our postganglionic fibers are substituted by the blood vessels and the neurotransmitters running between. All right, so one of the objectives is to compare sympathetic to parasympathetic. Well, one of the comparisons I want you to be aware of is right here. The sympathetic has short preganglionic and long postganglionic fibers. What that means anatomically is that the ganglia for the sympathetic system are quite close to the spinal cord, right? That's the only way you can end up with short preganglionic fibers. And that's true. Many of the ganglia for the sympathetic system are found in the sympathetic chain, which literally sits right next to the spinal cord. Okay, the collateral ganglia in the abdomen are probably the furthest from the spinal cord, but it's still not very far. You know, less than 6 inches. Then the organs, the target organs for the sympathetic division, are all over the body. So the fiber from ganglia to target organ is very long. Contrast that with the parasympathetic system. In the parasympathetic system, we have very long preganglionic fibers. So from nervous system out into the body is long, but then short postganglionic fibers. The reason for that is the ganglia of the parasympathetic division are usually in the target organ. So in sympathetic, we go from spinal cord to ganglia, and then from ganglia long way to effector, right? In parasympathetic, we go a long way to the ganglia, and then a short way to the effector. You see the difference? And then the anatomic distribution. The parasympathetic division comes from the cranial nerves and the sacral nerves, right? So we have 3, 7, 9, and 10 are the primary cranial nerves, the ganglia, and then the target organs. Another major difference that I want you to notice is that the sympathetic division innervates just about everything in the body. The parasympathetic division innervates specific areas of the body. Okay, so the sympathetic, because it innervates blood vessels, and blood vessels are everywhere, the sympathetic fibers are everywhere. The parasympathetic division is mostly for the GI tract, abdomen, pelvis, and head stuff, right? You know, like your salivary glands. Okay, so our pictures are getting more complicated. This is actually one of my favorite pictures of the sympathetic nervous system, because here we can see the emergence from the thoracolumbar area, right? And here's our sympathetic chain, so the ganglia that sit right alongside the spinal cord. And then our postganglionic fibers go from the sympathetic chain out to the target organs. Or you can see some of the autonomic fibers going to our abdominal and pelvic ganglia, like the celiac ganglia, superior mesenteric, inferior mesenteric here. Probably hard to see from where you're sitting. The red lines are preganglionic fibers, the black lines are ganglionic fibers. Okay, so what you can see here is a number of things. One, the emergence, thoracolumbar. The other is short preganglionic, long postganglionic. And then look at the wide variety of organs that are innervated, right? So just about everything is innervated. As opposed to the parasympathetic, this is the parasympathetic, same picture. Okay, so we see our emergence from the craniosacral region. We can see a lot of red lines, right? Because the ganglia are way out here in the organs. So we have long preganglionic fibers, very short ganglionic fibers. You can also see that most of the parasympathetic innervation that goes to the organs that we talk most about is all traveling through one cranial nerve. That's the vagus nerve, cranial nerve number 10. The primary parasympathetic carrier is the vagus nerve. The other place we see a lot of parasympathetic stimulation is through the sacral nerves, right? To the reproductive tract, to the urinary bladder, to the kidneys, to the rectum, small intestine, and so on. Okay? So, very different patterns of innervation between sympathetic and parasympathetic. Many of the same organs, but the path getting there is different.